Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Nandakumar. I think an excellent presentation to start off the afternoon. I'm glad that I was not the first one and he was the first one. So thanks to him. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to move away from technology and talk a little bit more about, what are some of the large enterprises doing about taking information and leveraging it to improve their business objectives, which is make more money. So I'm not going to focus so much on technology as such, but I'm going to talk more in terms of some of the methodologies that we've observed in some of the customers that I'm going to be introducing, and how are they using some of the solutions and how are they approaching the problem of managing information and leveraging it for their business benefit. So for a long time, I would say even now, MES is always understood to be Microsoft Excel sheet, right? It's not manufacturing execution systems. So this is an observation that we see still in a lot of companies. We see it even in some of the most large enterprises, food and beverage enterprises that are out there in the world, and not necessarily the smaller segmented manufacturing companies. So I think the first step is really to look at what are some of the larger companies which are benefiting by introducing MES or manufacturing execution systems in a way that they're standardizing some of the processes in which they handle information and how are they using it is the first step towards moving into seeing what is the roadmap we need to create to get into a world of better management of information. What I'm going to talk through is a couple of trends and triggers that actually have these companies have gone through to start this journey of going towards standardization of manufacturing execution systems. I'll talk about the return on investment that they eventually derive out of it. I'll also introduce to you what are some of the challenges that you typically face in terms of the various expectations stakeholders have within the organization when you start talking about introducing something like an MES system into the landscape. And also I'll talk, last but not least, I'll also talk about what is the process these companies go through in terms of selecting these technologies or the vendors who provide these technologies for MES kind of solutions, and what is their expectation in terms of supportability and deployment of these solutions. It's not just about having cool technology, but it's also about being able to sustain it. We heard a very interesting discussion in the pre-launch session about obsolescence and how do we support, what happens if Microsoft stops XP or Windows 7 supportability. So I think it's a very important topic. It's not about great technology, but it's also about how do you support and how do you ensure that our customers are going to run on it for a long time. While I've titled it as multi-site, I think to a large extent in the Asian context, and this is not very specific to India, to a large extent the APAC or Asia Pacific context, the multi-site can be actually just MES itself. It doesn't need to be MES across multiple sites, but just introduction of MES itself. The whole sentence that I put out there will hold good. So I think what we recognize, I take F&B as an example because that's an area that we have been fairly successful, and we've seen a lot of progress being made in some of the customers that we've dealt with in terms of moving towards standardization. So I've taken F&B, food and beverage, as an example. So if I take food and beverage, variety is a given, right? I'll talk a little bit more about the impact of variety. Unlike probably some of the more continuous process industries like take oil and gas. Even oil and gas now, if refineries, you still have variety as a challenge that some of the refineries are facing in terms of the various standards that they need to be producing the fuels against. But in food and beverage, variety or variability plays a very big factor, right? So moment you have variability, you're talking about a lot of waste being generated because you're moving from different manufacturing lines, you're changing the SKUs that you're manufacturing on those lines. So you need to be very agile, which means you're automatically introducing waste into your system. So I think introduction of MES, and more importantly, a standardized way of approaching MES, is not about taking out this unknown factor in the variety, but it's more about making sure that you're separating the necessary variety in your business from the unnecessary variety to really make sure that you're making money out of your manufacturing investment or the assets that you put down for manufacturing. So the variety is typically introduced primarily because the customer or we as end consumers of a food and beverage brings in terms of our expectation of the variety we expect from the goods that we consume. Example is, some examples that are given here is Pepsi. If you look at the brand variety that they have, it's such a huge brand variety that they need to manage, that they have very complex processes in being able to address that market requirement, which puts the pressure back on the manufacturing capability to be agile and be efficient. You talk about countries where they need to localize. It's not about just having one product. Pepsi cannot have one product and say we're going to go with Pepsi in all the markets. They need to start looking at what is the market requirement of, say, the specific geography that is there. The SKUs might change. You might not be able to take a 500 ml bottle of Pepsi down into some of the geographies that are out there. You might have to, need to probably start producing SKUs of 330 ml. So your variety is also introduced because the market expectation is very different. You have further complications in terms of the expectations on margins, right? I mean, there's a market expectation on these manufacturing companies where, while you need to be able to be agile and react to your consumer demands, there's a huge pressure on you from the stakeholders, from the manufacturing companies, the stakeholders, to make sure that they're meeting their margins. So, added to this, in a food and beverage industry, which is again, we see it in a lot more other industries, you have mergers and acquisitions happening. So there's a constant, roll up of multiple companies which introduces. I mean, an example here given is that of Nestle. If you look at the number of companies Nestle has either had joint ventures or has actually bought them over a period of 8-9 years, it's already a huge list of companies. So what this introduces into manufacturing is, you're looking at it and saying, where do I standardize? What do I standardize, right? So if you start looking at the most lowest level, which is your process level or your equipment level, you might not want to bring in too much of standardization because the variety is far too much. You would have done, as I said, through the acquisitions and mergers, you would have got a variety of vendors whose automation equipment you've already gotten, you've got legacy stuff. So standardization probably is not easiest to introduce into the automation layer. So what you start looking at, and obviously standardization at the business level is already to some extent in place in terms of the ERPs, because you can bring in process standardization by introducing an SAP or an Oracle kind of a system in place. But what is missing is bringing in standardization in your manufacturing processes. And that is where we see a lot of the customers looking at it and saying, we are standardized on the business level. Automation standardization is not going to be an easy activity that we can undertake. Let's look at standardizing this middle piece, which enables information, that is huge amount of information that we're getting from our automation layer. We talked about big data in all the earlier sessions. How do we use that information to be able to make sure that we are processing the information and making the right business decisions at the financial and business level? Once the decision has been made, you start looking at it and saying, what are some of the key triggers in terms of wanting to go the standardization route? And this is something we observe again. I'll give examples of some of the customers a little later. It could be as simple as someone wanting visibility. We talked earlier about not knowing what is happening in some of our plants. I'll give you an example of Nestle again. They have 500 odd plants which are spread across the entire globe. They are in some remote locations, some are in very advanced countries, but they still want to make sure that they're getting consistent information to be able to make decisions at the corporate level. And they've undertaken a very long project, which is like going on for more than 15-20 years now, wherein they're looking at standardizing the business layer first, and now they started moving down into the manufacturing layer. So standardization is something which is driven by different reasons. It's because of lack of visibility. It could be because of the need for having greater speed in your supply chain. We talked about not being able to react in your supply chain to the consumer demand that you have. It could be because of growth reasons, again margin pressures, again related from a business perspective, or it could be because of shadow IT. So you have a lot of bespoke solutions getting built in the different organizations in a company, because nobody's standardizing and each individual entity will start building its own solution. And you want to make sure that does not happen. You want to consolidate those activities and build one way or one platform of approaching how we are collecting data and making use of the data at the higher business level. To add to that, you also have various stakeholders. It's not just manufacturing. You also have stakeholders in the executive level, who of course have the margin pressures, and the stakeholder or the market stakeholder responses that they need to be equipped for. You have people sitting in engineering who want to make sure that the standardized way of approaching MES makes sure that equipment uptime or downtime is limited. You're not resulting in too much of downtime. You have procurement people who want to make sure that through the MES system they're able to make sure that they're getting the right raw materials available for manufacturing. So there are various stakeholders that you would need to interact with, and this adds a level of complexity in terms of approaching. How do you make sure that you're looking at the right sweet spot for looking at standardization? So putting it in context, right? I mean, as I mentioned earlier, you have at the higher level, you have your stakeholders, you have business goals in terms of better market share, improved margins, greater ability to respond in terms of the demands of the market in terms of agility. You're looking at introducing your manufacturing standardized platform. You're looking at some kind of standardization in terms of the way you approach gathering data from your automation layer. So what would be some of the expectations or goals you would set for yourself at the manufacturing level, which enables you to reach your business objectives, which are there on the top? It's important to make sure that you're identifying some of these initiatives, and this is again coming from the fact that how some of our customers have gone about trying to understand what is the business objective they're trying to serve, and then look at what is it that they want to actually standardize in terms of some of the functionalities within the box of the manufacturing execution systems. It's not about saying it's a technology standardization. It's more about saying what is my business objective that I'm serving, and what processes do I want to standardize to make sure that I meet that business objective. So you go down the path and you look at things like quality, right? I mean, quality is an important aspect to make sure that you improve your market share, and you're actually creating a brand for yourself in terms of improved quality. You look at margins, improving margins. Improving margins, if you look at it from a manufacturing perspective, it automatically impacts your waste. How do you manage your waste? How do you ensure that you always have improved cycle times on your lines? So you need to make sure that you're relating your business objectives in terms of the processes that you want to identify for standardization. So I think in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the stories or the business cases that you build in to make sure that introducing standardization is built around what is your business objective or what is your market facing objective that you have, and how does that relate to an operational process that you want to actually standardize using MES as a standard, as a tool to ensure that you're standardizing those processes. So I think these are some of the questions that we ask our customers, and some of our customers are looking at to answer when they look at these trends and triggers that I mentioned earlier. How are they prioritizing the product portfolios? What is important for them? Is it important for them to make sure that the right SKUs are available in the right market? Is that the priority? So it's a matter of ensuring that the business priorities are set before you start looking at what is it that I want to standardize in terms of an MES implementation. Moving down into the software, selection of the software. Once you've identified the processes, you identify the business reasons for putting in standardization, we then move into what is the next objective, which is, okay, I'm going to choose the right vendor who's going to provide me the software and the technology, and also provide me the right support to make sure that there is a dependency that I can build on him for a long-term period. So before getting into solution, even though we jump a lot into solution in this right column here, what is critical here is a process understanding is extremely important. What do you want to achieve with this technology, right? I mean, you've identified your business drivers, you've identified your processes that you want to actually automate or standardize. What is the relevance of technology for those processes? And does the vendor that you have chosen, I mean, being from Schneider, I've chosen obviously my product out here, but I think you need to start mapping out, or the customers start mapping out, do they have the required technology to actually address this requirement that is there from a technology perspective on the process? You start, the customers, I mean, a lot of them go through this process, and we see this happening a lot more these days. I mean, there's a large beverage company which did this whole activity for a one-line MES implementation, which you would normally think, it's not a large transaction size actually for an MES deal, but actually they went through this entire process of making sure that they're going down the right path, because this is not just about that one line where they wanted the MES, but it's about making a start for MES and then eventually looking at deploying it all across their plants that they own in India and across Asia Pacific. So it becomes important to look at the various aspects that they, as when I say they, I mean the customers that we interact with, how do they perceive some of the success criteria for an implementation of MES. I mean, even though I mentioned multi-site, you could replace that of successful factors for an MES implementation. You have people, which means that you need to have the right sponsor within the customer's organization. It cannot be something which is led by an automation owner who wants to improve line efficiency. It's about processes, because you need to have the right process identified, you need to have the right governance structure set in place. It's about technology readiness. We talked a lot about technology in the morning session. So it's about how ready is your automation technology. I mean, MES is great to have, but if the automation technology is not enabled to give you that information, I mean, MES is just waiting for nothing out there, right? So it's important to make sure that your infrastructure is ready to be able to actually provide that value add which MES can bring in, which you can then populate your business decisions that you make on the top. On the other hand, what do they look at the MES vendors for, right? I mean, this is something which, again, pulled together from the various conversations that we've had with some of the key customers who have gone down this path. So they look at three pieces. One is, do they have the right expertise? I mean, have they done it somewhere else, right? I mean, references is a very important question that is asked. Have they done it somewhere else? I mean, I've taken the examples of beverages here. I mean, have you done this implementation of MES in a beverage industry somewhere else? So it's important to have that knowledge of having done it somewhere else. Have they been thought leaders? Have they been around in the industry for long enough to be able to articulate the value of the solution to me as a customer, right? So I think it's about thought leadership. You look at then, do they have the right product for it? How much of it is out of the box? How much of it is actually customization? So a lot of customers today, when they release what they call as an RFP, there is actually a very detailed section in terms of what is standard functionality, what is out of the box functionality, and what is really customized solution. And in fact, they rate vendors based on those criteria. And this is becoming extremely critical for them, because they do not want to end up with another bespoke solution, even though it's from a large MES vendor out there in the market. So I think it's very important to make sure that the right product is being chosen for the solution that they're looking at, going down the path of standardization. Do they have the right integration strategies? Because of the varied automation layer, are they able to interface with legacy systems? The new technology automation that is coming up, are they able to standardize and integrate to them effectively? Do they have the ability to actually scale? They typically start with one line, and then they say, fine, now we're going to roll this out to 30 lines and then go to 20 sites. Do they have the ability to scale? Then you go down in terms of, fine, great product, they have the expertise, they have the consultants. Do they have the right ecosystem of resources to be able to service me in the geography that I'm present? So it's important. It's not just about having great technology. If I'm sitting out there, if I have all my experts and all my capabilities sitting in, say, Europe for a customer out here in India, I need to have a local interaction point with whom I can interface and get the solution deployed. So it becomes important that you have a local capability, or the vendor has a local capability to deploy. And this is a question that is being very seriously asked out of a lot of vendors. And this, again, is an important aspect when you're going down this path of standardization. A lot of them miss this aspect because they feel that it's a one-off implementation, because it's, I'm just doing it because my one plant guy wants OEE dashboard to be seen in his cubicle, so he wants visibility. It's not about that. It's about how serious are you about standardization. So the typical process that we are observing our clients are going down is, it's really about consultative. It's no longer becoming, of course, the initial process is about selecting the vendor, but once they've gone past that stage, it's really about going down a consultative path in terms of understanding how can we be a partner to the customer in making sure that they are successful. So to close the loop on this table, I think a lot of considerations. While technology is important, while the product capability and features are important, it's also a lot about life cycles of those solutions, of those products. And again, I go back to the point that we discussed in the morning. It's about what is the supportability of the product over a period of time. How are you going to change when the underlying technology changes? I mean, much like Rockwell, our product base is also based on Microsoft. So what is the impact when your underlying technology changes? So we need to be able to actually have those answers in place. As a customer, it's their right to ask those questions and get answers from the vendors before they go down this path. It's not about a one-time implementation, but it's a long relationship that they're going with the customers. So just to give you a snapshot of some of the customers whom we have worked with, some of them are fairly well ahead down this path of standardization, examples being Nestle, Arla, some of them are getting into it, like Carlsberg and Heineken are getting into it. So a lot of them are started approaching this problem very differently, or approaching this concept of standardization very differently. Again, like I said, it's not localized. It is always done at a central level. There is a central engineering group which typically does the interaction, and that is where the discussions happen. And that, I think, is a more programmatic approach to MES than looking at it as a one-time or a one-off implementation that you would look for one site or one line within a plant. So the moment you start looking at multi-sites, obviously the expectation is you need to have the economies of scale to be able to make it beneficial to the customer. So I think the graph on the right here, what it's depicting is, while the value over number of sites when you deploy it increases, it's important to make sure that the cost benefit is actually delivered to the customer. So there is a need for looking at templatized solutions being provided, which means that you're putting in an effort initially upfront, which is of high cost. And then once you have a template approach to it, you start rolling out, which means the customer benefits from subsequent rollouts. So I think this is something which is becoming an extremely interesting conversation in the customer, where the cost is not so much about how much is it going to cost me for one site and then multiply it by 30 sites because I have 30 sites. It's about, okay, fine, I want to do the standardization. What is your approach to it? What is my total cost, and how are you going to stagger the cost over the multiple sites? And that is something which I think is again going beyond the realms of just technology. It's about program management, and it's about the ability to actually manage large-scale projects. And again, I mean, from a Schneider Wonderware perspective, we've had fairly good success in terms of being able to showcase this with a few of our clients, and that's something which stands us in good stead when it comes to taking on subsequent projects. Last but not the least, another important aspect, which I think is the ultimate question that every customer asks before they sign off on that purchase order to the vendor, is, I'm spending so much of money, what is my ROI? And I think this is again a very important question. Sometimes it's not a straightforward answer that one can give on it, but I think from what we've observed, and I've given actually names here, these are names who have actually agreed to be quoted in terms of the benefits that they've derived out of it, and they're looking at very specific areas that they've picked up, whether it's filling and packaging in terms of line efficiency, whether it is labor cost reduction in terms of how it's not about reducing labor, it's about improving the efficiency of this labor that you can utilize them for other functions within the manufacturing line. Energy, we talked a lot about energy and the cost of energy that is, it's a huge cost in any manufacturing activity. So how do you make sure that, you're tabulating it and you're making sure that there's an ROI by introducing an MES system. So I think ROI is again another important topic which is critical to have as a conversation with the vendor in terms of, how do we go about calculating the ROI? It's not about just, again, cool technology and a great implementation capability. It's also about saying, how long are you going to be with me as a vendor? And again, it's not just a vendor relationship, it's a partnership that you're actually getting with the vendor and saying, how long are you going to go down with me down this path to make sure that we are both successful in the MES implementation. So with that said, I'm done with my presentation. It's 7 minutes.